His name was Marcus Ellis. He was
Here, can someone
62
come
years
out?
old, and on a cold Tuesday morning last March, a man half his age poured a full cup of coffee down the front of his uniform and laughed. Marcus did not flinch. He stood there in the marble lobby of the Halford Tower, the warm liquid soaking through cotton to his skin, and watched the younger man walk away grinning at his own joke. What that man did not know was that the brass elevator doors behind him were about to open, and that within 90 seconds, every executive in that building would learn exactly who the quiet janitor with the gray mop bucket really was. Before this story goes any further, take a moment to subscribe. But only if stories about quiet dignity and earned respect are the kind you return to. And if you would, leave the name of your city and your local time in the comments. There is something steadying about knowing where each of you is listening from. To understand what happened in that lobby, you have to understand the company Marcus had spent 34 years building from a single rented storefront. Ellison Hospitality Group owned 11 hotels and 3 office towers across the Midwest, and Marcus owned all of it. He had laid tile with his own hands in the first building. He had scrubbed his own floors when he could not afford to hire anyone to do it. Somewhere along the way, as the company grew past 1,000 employees, Marcus developed a habit the board found eccentric, and he found essential. Twice a year, without warning, he would put on a plain maintenance uniform, take a service badge under a false name, and spend a week walking through one of his own properties as a custodian. He swept lobbies. He emptied bins. He listened. He believed a man could not understand how his company treated the least powerful person in the room, unless for a little while he became that person. The general manager of the Halford Tower was a man named Trent Vance. He was 34, sharp-suited, and recently promoted by a regional director who admired his quarterly numbers. Trent ran the building with the polished confidence of a man who had never been told no. He shook hands firmly with anyone wearing a tie. He did not appear to see anyone who wore a uniform. There was one person in that building who saw Marcus clearly from the first morning. Her name was Gloria Reyes, and she had managed the custodial staff at the Halford Tower for 19 years. She handed the new janitor his cart on his first day, looked at his hands and said only, "You've done this work before." "I can tell." She did not pry. She simply made sure he had a clean rag and a full bottle, and she treated him from that first hour like a man worth treating well. He would remember that. The disregard began quietly, the way it usually does. On Marcus's second morning, he was mopping near the executive elevators when Trent walked past with 2 associates. Marcus stepped aside and held the path clear. Trent did not slow, did not nod, did not acknowledge the man pressed against the wall to make room for him. He simply kept talking about a golf game as though the space the janitor occupied were empty air. On the third morning it sharpened. Marcus was wiping down the glass of the front entrance when Trent arrived late, balancing a cardboard tray of drinks. He stopped, looked at the streaked glass, and said to no one in particular, "They'll let anyone hold a rag these days." One of the associates laughed. Marcus kept his cloth moving in slow circles, and the glass came clean, and he said nothing at all. The fourth day brought the moment Gloria would later describe to the board. The custodial staff ate lunch in a windowless break room near the loading dock. Marcus was sitting with a sandwich when Trent leaned in the doorway, searching for someone, and saw the old man eating. "There's a nicer room for that," Trent said, smiling. "Oh wait, no there isn't. For you." He left before anyone could respond. A younger custodian named Devon stared at his food. Gloria set down her coffee very gently. Marcus finished his sandwich and folded the wax paper into a neat square. That afternoon, Marcus watched Trent berate Devon for a smudge on the lobby floor that turned out to be a shadow. He watched him deny a vacation request from a woman whose mother was in hospice. He watched him take credit, in front of the regional director, for a guest service improvement that Gloria had designed and implemented herself 2 years earlier. Marcus made no notes. He did not need to. He had been remembering things his whole life. If you have ever been treated as though you were invisible at your own job, passed over, talked past, made smaller by someone who held a little power, write the word invisible in the comments. Sometimes it helps to know how many people understand exactly what that feels like. It was a Tuesday, the 11th of March, and the lobby was busy with morning arrivals when it happened. Marcus was mopping near the reception desk while a delivery courier waited and two guests checked their phones. Trent came through the revolving door in a hurry, a paper cup of coffee in one hand, his phone in the other. His shoe caught the edge of the wet floor sign, and a few drops of coffee splashed onto his cuff. He stopped. He looked at the cuff, then at the man holding the mop. "You're going to want to be more careful," Trent said, "about where you leave your little signs." Marcus said, "I'll move it, sir," but Trent had already decided how the moment would go. He stepped closer, and with a small theatrical flourish meant to amuse the associate beside him, he turned his cup over and poured what remained of the coffee straight down the front of Marcus's gray uniform. The liquid spread across the cotton in a dark bloom. "There," Trent said. "Now you've got something to clean up." The associate laughed uncertain. The courier looked away. One of the guests at the desk drew a quiet breath. Marcus stood very still, the warmth seeping through to his chest, a single drop running off the hem of his shirt and onto the clean floor he had just mopped. He did not raise his voice. He looked at Trent for one long moment, and then he said evenly, "All right." That was all. All right. He reached for the rag on his cart and began, calmly, to blot his own shirt. Behind Trent, the brass doors of the executive elevator slid open. What Trent did not know was that Marcus had ended his quiet inspection that very morning. He had already called the chairman of his board the night before from a hotel room down the street. He had told her what he had seen, not with anger, but with the flat precision of a man reading from a ledger. He named the denied hospice leave. He named the stolen credit. He named the lunchroom remark, and the courier who had witnessed it, and the date. And he had asked the board to do something they almost never did. He had asked them to come to the Halford Tower in person that Tuesday morning for what would be recorded simply as a scheduled ownership visit. He had given Gloria, and only Gloria, a quiet warning the evening before. "Tomorrow may be a strange day," he told her. "Whatever you see, know that you have done nothing wrong." He had built the leverage, as he always did, out of patience rather than rage. The badge under a false name. The week of watching. The witnesses who did not yet know they were witnesses. The board members stepping out of the elevator at the precise hour he had requested. There was a moment, late the night before, when Marcus had sat on the edge of the hotel bed with his shoes still on and wondered whether he was being unfair. The man was young. People could change. He had picked up the phone to call the chairman and tell her to cancel. Then he had thought of Devon staring at his lunch, and a woman whose mother was dying, and Gloria setting down her coffee so very gently. He had thought of every room he himself had been made invisible in, decades ago, when the world had not yet learned his name. He set the phone down and let the morning come. The chairman of the board, a silver-haired woman named Eleanor Pratt, stepped out of the elevator first. 4 other directors followed. The regional director who had promoted Trent was already crossing the lobby to meet them, his hand extended, his smile wide. Eleanor walked straight past him. She walked to the man in the coffee-stained uniform, the man holding a rag against his own chest, and she stopped in front of him. The lobby had gone quiet. Reception had stopped typing. The courier stood frozen. Roughly 30 people, guests, staff, 2 arriving executives, the regional director, and Trent Vance himself, watched what happened next. "Mr. Ellison," Eleanor said clearly into the silence. "We're so sorry to keep you waiting. Are you all right?" The words landed in the room like a stone into still water. The regional director's hand was still half extended. Trent's face went the color of paper. Marcus folded the rag once and set it on his cart. He turned to Trent, and when he spoke, his voice was no louder than it had been a minute before. "My name is Marcus Ellison," he said. "I built this company before you were born. I've spent the last week sweeping these floors because I wanted to know how my people are treated when no one important is watching." He paused. "Now I know." He did not shout. He did not point. He simply let the sentence sit there in the marble lobby, while Trent opened his mouth and found nothing in it. "You poured coffee on a man you thought could do nothing to you," Marcus said. "That is the only test that ever mattered, and you failed it in front of everyone." He turned to Eleanor. "I'd like to change out of this shirt. After that, I think the board and I have a personnel matter to discuss." A long, low murmur moved through the lobby. The regional director had lowered his hand. Near the supply closet, Gloria pressed her fingers to her mouth and her eyes were bright. Devon was standing very straight. Somewhere by the door, a single guest began, softly to applaud, and then stopped. Unsure if it was allowed, it did not need to continue. The silence had already delivered its verdict. The consequences arrived not as thunder, but as a slow, certain tide. Trent Vance was placed on administrative leave that afternoon and terminated within the week, after the board reviewed the courier's account, the denied hospice request, and 3 other complaints that had quietly sat in a file no one had bothered to open. The regional director who had championed him, and who had also signed off on the buried complaints, was reassigned and then, 2 months later, departed the company entirely. Marcus did none of it himself. He filed no lawsuit. He gave no interview. He posted nothing. He simply returned to his office, let the board follow the company's own policies, and watched the structure he had built do what it was designed to do. Word of the morning spread through the Ellison properties the way true stories do. Within a month, the company announced a new standard. Drafted in part by Gloria Reyes, every manager from the regional level down would spend 2 days each year working a frontline shift, housekeeping, custodial, or the loading dock under a temporary badge. Trent's name was never mentioned in the announcement. It did not need to be. Everyone knew the hospice request was approved retroactively with paid leave. Devon was enrolled in the company's tuition program by autumn. And Gloria, after 19 years, was promoted to a regional position she had earned long before anyone thought to offer it. 6 weeks later, on a Sunday evening, there was a small dinner in Gloria's kitchen. The chairs did not match. A pot of stew sat steaming on a trivet shaped like a sunflower, and the window over the sink was open to the smell of cut grass and someone's far-off barbecue. Marcus sat at the end of the table in an ordinary sweater. A man who looked, in that light, like anyone's grandfather. Devon was there, and his mother, and 2 of the custodial crew, and Gloria's sister who kept refilling everyone's glass before they could ask. The talk was about ordinary things, a leaking faucet, a grandson's baseball game, whether the stew needed more salt. Near the end of the meal, Gloria raised her water glass, not her wine, and looked down the table. "To the man," she said simply, "who came back to find out who we were." Marcus shook his head gently. "To the people," he answered, "who treated a stranger well when there was nothing in it for them." He looked at the mismatched chairs, the steam rising off the pot, the open window. "That's the only fortune I ever cared about keeping." Outside, the light went soft and gold across the floor. No one mentioned Trent. No one needed to. He was somewhere far from that warm kitchen, and his absence was the quietest, fullest kind of justice there is. If you are watching this and you recognized yourself somewhere in this story, if you have ever been the person in the room that everyone looked past, then this last part is for you. You are allowed to expect to be treated with respect, even when you hold no title. You are allowed to remember how someone treated you when they thought you could do nothing for them, because that memory is telling you the truth about who they are. You are allowed to respond to cruelty with composure instead of noise, and to understand that calm is not weakness. It is the discipline of a person who knows their own worth. You are allowed to walk away from rooms that make you small, and to build new tables with people who see you clearly. And you are allowed to believe that the way you treat the powerless is the only real measure of your character, no matter what your business card says. Marcus Ellison spent 34 years building something out of nothing. But the thing he was proudest of, in the end, was not the 11 hotels or the 3 towers. It was a Sunday table with mismatched chairs and an open window, surrounded by people who had been kind to him before they knew his name. If this story stayed with you, tell me in the comments about a time someone underestimated you and how you carried yourself through it. I read every one, and if you are new here, you are welcome to stay a while. There are more stories like this, and we tell them slowly, the way they deserve to be told. Approx. 2,050 words. I've put together the full script above. A few notes on how I handled your brief. I kept it in third person throughout with no scene headings or labels. Gave the protagonist, the wise elder, register the framework favors, and built the hidden resource the way the framework prescribes. The incognito inspection is set up before the reckoning pays it off. The 3 engagement asks land at post hook, the 0-40% mark VHEO, and the recognition note inside the sermon, all framed as values aligned rather than transactional. The reckoning stays calm, Marcus never gloats, and the antagonist is absent from the closing table per the resolution rule. One thing worth flagging, at roughly 2,050 words this runs about 14 minutes of audio, not the 55-65 your framework targets. If 2,000 word meant you want the full long-form version, say so and I'll expand each section to its specified word count. The mistreatment montage and preparation phase have the most room to grow. I can also drop this into a downloadable file if that's easier for your production pipeline.